There's a moment early on in Wicked for Good where the camera pans across the freshly paved yellow brick road. It's a moment to evoke nostalgia, to remind us of the iconic imagery from the 1939 MGM classic The Wizard of Oz. Instead, it creates a false sense of excitement, a promise this film never fulfills. This opening encapsulates everything wrong with John M. Chu's sequel. It's all spectacle and nostalgia bait, lacking the substance and careful character work that made Wicked Part 1 such a pleasant surprise. After waiting a full year for this conclusion, I found myself increasingly frustrated as the credits rolled. Where Part 1 defied gravity with its patient world building and earned emotional beats, Part 2 crashes to earth, revealing the illusion behind the magic trick. This isn't just a weaker sequel, it's a fundamentally broken film that exposes the commercial cynicism of splitting one story into two parts. Let me be clear, I never saw the Broadway musical before watching these films. I came to Wicked Part 1 last year genuinely skeptical. How would a 3-hour stage musical work as a 3-hour movie? Musicals are inherently theatrical. Dialogue moves quickly, everything serves the music, and the compressed time frame creates natural momentum. I was wrong to worry. Part 1 worked remarkably well as cinema. It understood that we were unfamiliar to this world, so it took time to introduce everything properly. We met Elphaba as a child, ostracized for her green skin. We watched Galinda arrive at Shiz as a shallow social climber. The film built their relationship brick by brick. Initial antagonism giving way to grudging respect, then genuine friendship. Every beat felt earned through carefully crafted sequences. The wizard and I established Elphaba's dreams. What is this feeling? Captured their dynamic with humor. Dancing Through Life was a great set piece with that magnificent rotating library, and Defying Gravity is just a perfect cliffhanger. Part 1 was entirely setup, but it was confident setup that luxuriated in character moments. Elphaba and Glinda's dance at the Ozdust Ballroom, their popular makeover montage, the quiet scene releasing the lion cub. Part 2 has the opposite problem. It's all payoff with no buildup, assuming you've carried every emotional investment forward across 12 months. The film opens with Elphaba already in hiding, Galinda already the wizard spokesperson, and Fiyero already captain of the Gale Force. We are expected to hit the ground running, but after a year away, we need reminders of what's at stake. More damningly, Part 2 is shorter, despite having more story to tell. This creates a rushed, truncated feeling that permeates every scene. Where Part 1 gave characters room to breathe, Part 2 sprints from plot point to plot point like it's trying to catch up with itself. Nothing illustrates the pacing issues better than the Nessarose and Boq storyline, which consumes disproportionate screen time while feeling emotionally empty. In Part 1, this relationship was sketched simply. Boq, smitten with Glinda, takes Nessarose to the Ozdust as a favor. She develops feelings for him. It established both characters without overwhelming the main narrative. Part 2 expands this into a full tragic arc. Nessarose has inherited their father's governorship and becomes tyrannical, prohibiting Munchkins from leaving to keep Boq close. When Elphaba enchants Nessa's shoes so she can walk, Boq decides she no longer needs him and tries to leave for Galinda. Desperate, Nessarose attempts a love spell that backfires, shrinking his heart. Elphaba's attempt to save him transforms him into the Tin Man. And this is another example of where this movie totally flops and doesn't know where to go tonally. This moment should be devastating. Body horror, a cautionary tale about obsession, the tragic origin of an iconic character, but the film races through it so quickly that none of it resonates. It feels more like an Easter egg and a reference to pop culture than actually impacting the story in a positive way. This Tin Man reveal is a weird storytelling beat that fails to immerse you in an actual story. It just feels like an ad for another Wicked movie. We don't spend enough time understanding Nessarose's isolation or Boq's conflicted feelings. The transformation happens in a rush, just another plot point to check off. And I mean, the way they try to insert character work here is just ridiculous. There's like a couple flashbacks, which introduces that famous, iconic Wicked playbill poster where Glinda's whispering into Elphaba's ear. These are just brief moments, but the fact that they're only a couple seconds showing them all hanging out in flashbacks, like, why isn't that part of the story? Well, it's because the story has to move so quick. We don't have time for actual content. And what's worse, this subplot eats significant runtime that should belong to Elphaba and Glinda. Part 1 understood priorities. It gave us extended sequences of the leads bonding, fighting, reconciling. Part 2 gets distracted by secondary characters, losing sight of what worked. When we finally see Bok's transformed state, the film pauses for a dramatic shot. Here he is, the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz. But it's hollow spectacle. We haven't spent enough time with Bok to feel the tragedy, and the film immediately moves on. He's a cameo in his own origin story. And if the Nessa Rose Bok subplot wastes time, the Elphaba Fiyero romance exposes the film's fundamental inability to develop relationships organically. Jonathan Bailey was really good in Wicked Part 1. His dancing through life was one of the standout sequences. I really loved that. Bailey brought layers to what could have been generic, playing Fiyero as someone using performative shallowness to mask deeper intelligence. The first film planted seeds carefully. Fiyero helps Elphaba free the lion cub, and they share a moment in the forest, and she sings "I'm Not That Girl" about her unrequited feelings. It's poignant because it's understated. Part 2 expects us to believe this has blossomed into world-changing romance, but we never see it happen. The film opens with Fiyero engaged to Glinda while secretly searching for Elphaba. When they reunite, they share exactly one extended scene before the film treats them as deeply in love. That is supposed to sustain an entire arc culminating in Fiyero sacrificing everything, getting nearly beaten to death, and being transformed into the Scarecrow. From a filmmaking perspective, this is indefensible. Romance requires build-up, shared experiences, obstacles overcome together. Part 1 gave us that with Elphaba and Glinda. We watched their friendship develop over 3 hours. Elphaba and Fiyero get maybe 15 minutes combined across both films, yet we are supposed to accept their love as the catalyst for the climax. When a heartbroken Glinda suggests they're having an affair, the film treats this as shocking. But we never get to see them fall in love. The relationship exists only in exposition. The Scarecrow transformation is equally rushed. After Fiyero is beaten by guards, Elphaba's attempt to save him accidentally turns him into a Scarecrow. This should be horrifying. Another good intention twisted grotesque. Another failure for Elphaba's collection. Instead, it's explained so quickly it barely registered. Musical theater fans apparently didn't mind this truncated romance, having seen the more developed stage version, but as a film viewer, it felt utterly unearned, the clearest example of how Part 2 assumes too much familiarity and does too little work. And here's one of the core problems. Wicked for Good doesn't know what it wants to be. It's simultaneously a sequel to Part 1, a prequel to the 1939 Wizard of Oz, and trying to be its own epic conclusion. And this identity crisis proves fatal. Part 1 mostly avoided this trap. Yes, it featured young versions of iconic characters, but it told its own story about prejudice, friendship, and corrupted power. These themes felt relevant without constantly genuflecting to the 1939 film. Part 2 becomes enslaved to Wizard of Oz continuity, twisting itself into pretzels to set up every iconic element. The result is a mess. The Cowardly Lion appears in exactly one scene early on. He's among animals Elphaba encounters in hiding, exposing her as the reason the wizard created flying monkey spies. Later, he's part of Dorothy's traveling party, never developing beyond that Cowardly Lion character. The Scarecrow origin gets rushed past. The Tin Man exists solely to connect Bok to Oz lore. Neither transformation feels organic to Wicked's story. They are obligations. And then there's Dorothy. Dorothy Gale, protagonist of The Wizard of Oz, is literally locked in a basement for the end of this movie. She arrives in the house that kills Nessa Rose, Glinda gives her Nessa's enchanted shoes, and Dorothy is directed to the Emerald City. Later, she's part of the group sent to kill Elphaba. At the climax, she douses Elphaba with water, seemingly melting her. That's it. The most iconic character in Oz history is reduced to a plot device who never meaningfully appears on screen. If you're going to make Dorothy central to your climax, she literally kills your protagonist. She needs to be a character, not a reference. The film speed rushes through setting her up, desperately trying to reach for good. This rush job means we don't properly see Elphaba's emotional response to her sister's death. Nessa Rose is crushed by a tornado Madame Marble creates. Elphaba arrives, sees Dorothy wearing Nessa's shoes, furiously confronts Glinda, they fight, the Gale Force arrives, next scene. There's no sense or no space to grieve, no time to process that Elphaba has lost the sister she protected despite their complicated relationship. We needed a scene of Elphaba alone with her grief. breaking down, doing something that lets us feel the loss. Instead, sister dies, brief confrontation, moving on. This is what I mean by impossible middle ground. The film is so busy checking boxes, introduce Dorothy, explain the shoes, set up house-falling imagery, on top of just being a sequel, that this movie forgets to let its characters be human. And also the visuals are just terrible. Part 1's practical elements grounded the world. Jon M. Chu is a pretty good director. I honestly think he wants to do a really good job with this film. It's just kind of stuck with the constraints of being a blockbuster shot in a vacuum. There's a lot of blue screen and green screen technology that isn't something really I think he has total control over. That's more a budget issue. His team planted 9 million real tulips around Munchkin Land. They built a massive rotating library set, paved an actual yellow brick road with real mud, constructed a life-size Art Deco train. That tactile quality made Oz feel inhabited and real, especially in Part 1. Yes, there was digital augmentation, but the blend mostly worked. When Elphaba sang Defying Gravity and rose into the air, her cape billowing in homage to the stage musical's Flying Rig, it looked spectacular because Cynthia Erivo was actually suspended on wires against a physical set. Part 2 abandons this approach almost entirely. Everything looks so fake. The CGI backgrounds are the worst offenders. Flashbacks to Glinda's story looks like actors performing against green screen, because it is. The lighting doesn't match, environments don't feel dimensional. It constantly reminds you you're watching a movie breaking the fantasy. The forest where Elphaba hides looks like a video game environment. The trees are too perfect, the lighting is too even, there's no dirt, no texture, no life. Perhaps this is a budget issue or compressed post-production timelines. Either way, the visual degradation undermines the fantasy. Where Part 1 convinced me Oz was a place I could visit, Part 2 constantly reminds me it's a soundstage with digital backgrounds. The performances are good as always. Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande are excellent singers. They're great actors, but it just can't help the fact that this story doesn't really work as a two-part movie. This should have been one movie. I understand the financial incentive. Universal saw the success of splitting Harry Potter, Twilight, and Hunger Games finales. When Part 1 made $759 million worldwide, becoming the highest-grossing musical film adaptation ever, they probably felt vindicated. But the Wicked stage musical is one show with an intermission, running about 2 hours 45 minutes. The film adaptation of Part 1 alone was 160 minutes, nearly as long as the entire stage show. Part 2 adds another 140 plus minutes. That's over 5 hours for a story that works as 3 hours on stage. The decision to split it wasn't creative, it was commercial, and it breaks the story. Compare this to Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. Each film had its own arc. Fellowship is about forming the Fellowship and choosing to destroy the ring. The Two Towers is about war coming to Rohan. Return of the King is the final battle. You can watch any and have a complete experience with beginning, middle, and end. Wicked only works as a 6-hour experience. Part 1 ends on a cliffhanger, Part 2 begins in media res. There's no natural break, just an arbitrary one at Defying Gravity because it's the stage musical's Act 1 finale. Jon M. Chu said they split the story because it became impossible to wrestle the story of Wicked into a single film without doing some real damage. He claimed cutting songs or trimming characters would be fatal compromises. But what they created instead is worse. 2 incomplete films that damage the story in different ways. Part 1 works better because it's patient, but it's all questions. Part 2 rushes to provide answers, but loses the character work that made us care. A single 3-hour film could have told the story properly. In the end, we get a movie that feels like The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, an overstuffed, rushed finale to a story split unnecessarily. By the third Hobbit film, Peter Jackson, who was so concerned with connecting everything to Lord of the Rings and delivering CGI spectacle that he forgot coherent storytelling. Wicked for Good makes the same mistakes. Like I said, Jon M. Chu clearly loves this material. His camera work remains elegant, his staging shows craft and ambition, and the costume design, Academy Award winning for Part 1, it's consistently beautiful. But as cinema that needs to work on its own terms, Wicked for Good fails. It's rushed where it should be patient, bloated where it should be focused, distracted by franchise obligations when it should center on character. Part 1 convinced me modern musical adaptations could work, that you could translate beloved stage shows to film with intelligence and care. Part 2 is a stark reminder that splitting stories for commercial reasons rarely succeeds, and that sequels without momentum collapse under their own weight. Most frustratingly, the pieces are here for a great film. The Elphaba-Glinda friendship is genuinely moving when focused on. The themes about truth, power, and the cost of doing right remain relevant. For Good works beautifully. But you can't build a film on one great scene when everything around it is truncated and overstuffed with obligations to source material that doesn't need such slavish adapting. Part 1 spark that careful balance of spectacle and substance, character and plot, world building and story has been extinguished. What remains is a rushed conclusion to a story that deserved better. Sometimes the magic just doesn't last, and no amount of green elixir can bring it back.